Hey, it's Phil. Before you're going to check out my Rants About Humanity episode, I also want to invite you to consider following me and subscribing on my podcast channels and my Rumble video player channel down below. You can find it in the description. With the increasing censorship and limitations of freedom of YouTube, I don't know how long I will be able to have my thought-provoking conversations on YouTube. So if you want to support me in my mission of freedom of speech, open debate, be sure to also check me out and follow me on those platforms. I'm all about open debate, no censorship, no filter. So no matter what happens, I will keep on having my important interactions about topics that don't get enough attention. Hope to see you on my other channels and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome everyone on the Rants About Humanity podcast. Today I have 𝗍𝗫𝗕𝗏 as a guest. 𝗍𝗫 is a retired engineer who has for many years struggled to find better ways to do what should be the easiest thing imaginable, convincing people not to injure their own children. He joined his first bloodstained man protest in 2014 and decided then that the on-street and online actions of the organizations are one of the most promising ways to raise awareness of the problem of male genital mutilation. There we already dropped the word. Thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast and also be willing to talk about what seems to be one of the most controversial issues in general. I witnessed this in the past, which is talking about circumcision and especially circumcision when it's without consent. Why is there so much? I mean, there's so many things to have controversy about. Why is this often the top three things that is so controversial?
There are many reasons. People have been misled to believe that it's a good thing. So they think it's beneficial when it's actually, of course, harmful to do an amputation of a healthy body part from a non-consenting individual. So it's clearly harmful. There's no body parts that are extra. Every body part is there because nature built it for us. The foreskin is 65 million years old. So it's a lot older than any human culture who claims that they have the right to destroy it. And so in America, people have been misled to believe that it's a good thing. And so telling them that they've been lied to it's surprising. You get a surprising amount of pushback. People don't want to confront the fact that they've been fooled. I think it was Mark Twain that said it's a lot easier to fool people than to convince people that they've been fooled.
And it's impossible to put the foreskin back on.
It's a one-way thing. Once you've killed part of him, when you cut off a living body part, you're killing that body part. You've killed part of your baby when you've circumcised him.
Can we go back? I'm going to guide the conversation a bit. Could you guide towards the origins of circumcision?
Well, I don't think anybody really knows the absolute beginning. I mean, it's some kind of dark ritual. Sigmund Freud thought that it was a substitute for child sacrifice, that previously they were sacrificing children and then they just started sacrificing part of the child. And you can see where he got that when you look at Genesis, the story of Abraham. The first part of the story, Abraham is intending to murder his son, and an angel stops him. And then the idea of circumcision is introduced next. So you can see there's like an angel, something changed in their society where they stopped human sacrifice of children. So that's the angel in the story. And then they substituted it with this sacrifice of the foreskin. So, I think where Freud got the idea.
There's some things in a lot of like ancient religions, and please, I'm not an expert in this. People can respond in the comments or let me know what they think, where it comes from. But there's something about blood and a blood oath, and then like an exchange that you do to make a covenant with God or something. Some people also compare it to Babylonian or Assyrian blood rituals, and that then some elements were taken over in the Old Testament. I mean, this is all guesses, but this is some stuff that I read about it.
Well, it's without doubt a blood ritual because you can't cut without blood. So it's a blood ritual for sure. Some people don't like that. It's without doubt human sacrifice because every part of a human being is human. So if you sacrifice, if you destroy, if you kill part of a human being, you're performing a human sacrifice. So human sacrifice is still with us amongst people who are highly sophisticated, educated people They're still practicing human sacrifice today.
Is that in the Old Testament itself that God demands it and calls literally for circumcision, or is it an interpretation?
So this is interesting. There's two versions of Genesis, Genesis 15 and Genesis 17. And in the Genesis 15, the covenant between the Jews and their God was kept with an animal sacrifice. And about 1,100 years later, Genesis 17 was added to the story, which is a different version. But instead of an animal sacrifice, then God demands circumcision. So sometimes people say, well, it's so old, they use the argument from antiquity. If it's old, it must be good. Well, the oldest version of the covenant doesn't involve cutting a boy's foreskin. It involves an animal sacrifice. So,
one of the arguments that is used a lot is, yeah, but it's desert people, and when you have a foreskin, sand can come in, and then you can have a lot of infections. So as a precaution, maybe taking a look at the desert, I don't even if it was true where it comes from, like it actually is a precaution to have a lot of infection of the penis and the foreskin.
That's absolutely laughable. It's ridiculous.
But you've heard it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, just think about it. In those days, they had no sanitation. They didn't know anything about germs. They had no way of they couldn't do, they had no sanitary facilities for doing surgery. So the number of people who died or suffered major infections had to be greater than anything it was supposed to prevent. And it doesn't, in fact, prevent any disease because, people where they don't circumcise boys, the boys and men are healthier than places where they do. So if you compare Europe to America, Europe has fewer circumcisions and better sexual health for males. So the idea that circumcision improves health is absurd and proven false by the real world data. And also in Australia, they used to circumcise all their boys, and about 40 years ago, they decided that was a stupid thing to do. They stopped, and their sexual health has improved. And at the time they stopped, the circumcision advocates were saying, oh, no, you can't stop circumcision. There'll be terrible diseases. Well, there's just a lie. It's just a lie. They'll do any kind of lie to mutilate boys. So there's some kind of obsession, compulsion, mutilation fetish that seems to drive people to want to mutilate and torture boys. And so, I mean, there's a sickness in it that's hasn't really been explored.
Yeah, and even if I would go with the story of in the desert and sand and infections, like how does this still uphold, in Northern America? Or you just talked about, certain cities in Australia or other people in the world. It's not even, I think, in the New Testament, there's no mention that you have to be circumcised. It's not a precondition. But still, you see in a country like America, which is mostly Christian, I don't know, you will know the percentage of how many men are circumcised, but it's massive. It's massive.
Right.
And I thought it would be a Muslim thing and a Jewish thing mostly, but no, in America, it's like, I don't know, you can say how much percentage it is, but it's massive.
Right. So Christians, St. Paul, or Paul of Tarsus, who became St. Paul, at the time, the early Christians were all Jews. It was a Jewish sect to begin with. And as it became popular, or they started to bring in new adherents, a lot of them were uncut men, and they didn't want to be circumcised. They didn't want to become Jews to become Christians. And so at that point, Paul said, okay, circumcision is not part of this religion. It's not a requirement anymore. It doesn't matter if you're circumcised. You can be intact, and that's fine. There's no benefit to being circumcised. The words they used was the circumcision of the heart, which they meant the change that was needed to join the religion was a change in your heart. It's a spiritual thing, not a physical thing. So and later other Christian writers, it just said, circumcision is absolutely not part of our religion. If you're circumcised, God or Jesus will do nothing for you. So it's not a Christian thing. And in Europe, Christians understand that right away. It's not, we don't do that. We're Christians. We don't do that. That's the Jews and the Muslims that do that. Mm-hmm. In America, which is an absolute monstrous failure of American Christian leaders, They have failed to inform their flocks that this is against their religion. I've heard so many Americans, Christians tell me, well, I'm Christians, we circumcise because we're Christian. It's like, well, no, you got it all wrong. You don't even know your own religion. You don't circumcise, you're a Christian. But nevertheless, in America, they've been sold lie after lie after lie, and that's one of them, that somehow it's a Christian thing. It's not.
How many men are circumcised in America?
I think it's like 70 to 80% of the men alive today. When I was born in the 1950s, it was
in America or in the world?
In America only. No, in the world, it's more like 30%. So when I was born in the 1950s, they circumcised basically everybody. And apparently they didn't even ask, they just did it. And then I think it was going at a very high rate until the 70s, and it was like 80, 90%. And then people started to realize it's a stupid thing to do. And it has faded from there to about 55% today of newborns are circumcised. They then find ways to impose circumcision on boys after the newborn period by forcibly retracting the foreskin and injuring the boy and saying, well, you see, you should have circumcised him. Now we'll have to cut him. So it's monstrous. It's monstrous. So you take your baby in for his well baby visit, and they'll just forcibly retract the foreskin. Not always, but often. There's lawyers who specialize in just forcible retraction in the United States. They forcibly retract the foreskin, which is it's supposed to retract on its own over the course of years, loosen and separate from the glands. And then they cause an injury. And then that's the justification for further circumcisions. So we don't really know the whole number by the time, but most of them are done in the first year of life. And it's still, best numbers we have is still the majority of boys are being cut in America.
And what would be the major reason? Is it mostly health and wellness, or is it religion? It's a mix probably, but which of those two prevails mostly?
It's money. The major reason is money. It's $1 billion industry. There's no,
the reason Americans do it, they're like, mostly if you would go to an average American family and they tell you why they circumcise their boy, will they mostly say it's because of religion, or mostly because of health, or just it's the thing to do? Or
they will. There are lots of reasons, but oftentimes they say they wanted him to look like his dad, which is ridiculous, of course, because if you're missing an arm, you don't cut off your child's arm. I mean, if the dad is an amputee, you don't want your son to be an amputee. I mean, that's ridiculous, but that's the way and the reason they do that is the dad has never dealt emotionally with the loss of his foreskin. He hasn't grieved. He hasn't come to terms with what happened to him. So rather than deal with the reality that he's an amputee and that he was betrayed by his own people and that he was just treated as a pawn for somebody else's money-making scheme, and that's the type of society he actually lives in, rather than face that, he'd rather just mutilate his son so that he can pretend everything is fine with him.
How is money being made?
My dick.
How is money being made because I don't see how people actually make money.
It's a for-profit. Medicine is a for-profit industry in America. So every medical, the more procedures you do, the more money you make. So right there, it's $1 billion industry just cutting the boys. Hospitals make money, doctors make money. There's, of course, there are many injuries, and then there's further revisions and further surgery on boys sometimes. 20% of the boys suffer what's called meatal stenosis, which is a narrowing of the opening of the penis. And sometimes that requires surgery to correct. So this is extremely painful surgery. It's traumatic. The boy's been through one trauma already, and they put him through a second trauma to correct the fuck up of the first trauma. I mean, the lack of care for American boys is just shocking.
I mean, also, I don't know how long. I mean, we can talk about some Jewish stories that I heard, like how it's done, which is, just mind-boggling that it still exists in the 21st century. But just cutting off a healthy part of your, we have to be calling it in the whole episode like it is, like, there's no sugarcoating it. But I mean, as a man, you have also sexual energy, you have sexual prowess, like it's basically your life-giving force, giving you direction. Energy is being confident, straightforward energy. And that is already being cut off. That is being punished. That part that is vitalizing is damaged. Like on a metaphysical, on an existential level, that must leave some impact on the child. You know how important the child checks the environment if they are okay, if the environment is okay. And this is being done so early. That must, I think, leave an imprint on the child.
You're absolutely right. It's totally traumatic. And we have a whole generation of men who have suffered or have post-traumatic stress disorder. Boys, after they've been cut, they overreact to, when they get their vaccine injections, the cut boys overreact compared to the other ones. So their brain has been suffered trauma already. I mean, this is heartbreaking stuff. It's just unbelievable that this could be going on and still going on after all that's known, and you just can't stop the machine. It's just shocking. It's
also a very sensitive part of the body, because if you still have your foreskin, or if ever you pull your foreskin too much to the back and it starts bleeding, it's almost like, just look at when your lip is bleeding or your eyebrow is bleeding. It's so full of like sensitive nerves that it just bleeds like crazy. So it's a very sensitive spot, with a lot of blood running through it. It's not just, I don't feel a thing, It's very sensitive skin with I don't know how much nerves that are super sensitive.
Right. So most of the sexual sensitivity in the penis is in the foreskin. So most of your for circumcised men, most of their sexual sensitivity has been destroyed. It's lost forever. They'll never know what it's like to have normal sex. I mean, just think about that. They have no chance ever. So it's just that's just been foreclosed to them forever. And that's another part of why it's so hard for cut men to come to terms with what happened to them, because they now have to face that they've been missing most of their sexual sensitivity, which is very important to men. I mean, come on, men like sex. I mean, it's just like, how could you think that wouldn't be important to men? And so, so it was.
Yeah, you look at it rationally, like, I'm going to enhance my sexual performance by cutting off a piece of my penis, which is just like, listen, maybe most men come too soon, but even then, if you would come too soon and it's really an issue, you can use certain tantra techniques or other techniques, or if as a last resort, and you want to do it with full consent and you want to have less friction, maybe you can get circumcised because it's, it's too much friction and you come too fast. But by default, like, for instance, like only certain positions I come fast, but other I come pretty slow. I can't imagine me being circumcised. I would really just be pounding a woman without ends and never coming. I'm putting it bluntly here, but I know people are like this. I read studies that Muslims, they ram a woman more and more hard just to get some feeling and some friction, because there's just a lot less friction without the foreskin.
Yeah, it's damaged. I mean, it's damaged. There was a study done in Denmark by Morten Frisch, and he did a survey of heterosexual couples and the pleasure they got, and the women whose partners were cut had a much greater report of painful sex. So it ruins it not only for the man, but for the woman. And so, I mean, it's like, well, life is hard enough. Why would you ruin one of the good things about life? Why would anybody choose to do that? It's crazy.
And then you have the aesthetics sometimes with the whole porn industry, that everybody is like circumcised, which I don't know why. I mean, it's all about aesthetics and impression, I guess. It looks bigger now that it's circumcised. And that also gives, especially with these generation of boys growing up with their ideal of sex through porn, they're almost all circumcised.
Yeah, well, a lot of the porn is done in America. So a lot of it comes out of the San Fernando Valley in California, and the population there is mostly cut. So that might be it, or it might be that they just don't want to show uncut guys. I don't know. I don't know. It's really, I mean, to me, it's like, well, if you want porn, you'd want, I mean, if you have athletes, you wouldn't want to have athletes who are missing their feet if they're going to be runners. I mean, it's like, if you want to make good porn, they should be intact.
Yeah, but it always seems so absurd to have this discussion, but then, you know, it gets like so heated. And a lot of times you have, you know, I also talked about it with everything that's going on with COVID. It's people have a value disposition, or something happened, or they have a feeling disposition, and then they backwards rationalize that it makes sense. So once this is being done to people and then their values, they just keep on grasping to prove for it to make sense. You can provide all the evidence, but like I had some people who are like circumcised, they're like, no, it's the best thing ever, it's needed, but they never knew otherwise. You never know what it's like. I mean, you can't argue with how it would be because it happened without your consent.
Yeah, the grief of realizing what happened is really overwhelming, and some men commit suicide after they understand what circumcision did to them. So it's like, if you give them any alternative, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how patently absurd it is, they're so desperate to cling to something that says that, oh, this was for a reason, that no matter how ridiculous, you can throw them anything and they'll cling to it. So it just shows you the grief, the depth of the harm, and just how sick it is to be doing this to people.
And also the lobby, and especially the Jewish lobby, I mean, I'm calling out things as it is, they're insanely big, because when you look at research, and half of the research is being done by the Jewish lobby or Jewish financiers, and then they still found reasons why it has no effect at all or no negative effects. Now, there's one thing that it happens, and you say it's because of religion or health in the past, but you're cutting off a super sensitive part of your body with a lot of nerve endings that also provide some lubricant. And then they still are able to produce, I don't say science propaganda that shows like no effects. This is, I mean, if you look for it online, it's massive how much this lobby is sponsoring things on the other side and don't allow proper research.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing we should always say is that we don't ever malign a group of people. Whenever we talk about blame, always talk about specific people or specific organizations, because if you malign a whole group of people, then the innocent get hurt the most. And most Jews are not responsible for this. So I always feel like it's important to do that, because it's so easy to get into sort of a tribal competition, tribal hate thing, and we don't want to do that. So there are specific people and specific organizations that should be called out and blamed for what they've done. One of them is the American Academy of Pediatrics, which has promoted circumcision through very deceptive means, and was called out by European pediatricians and the leaders of the pediatric societies of 38 European and Canadian organizations. And they just destroyed the AAP argument. It's ridiculous, it's biased, it's not scientific, it's incoherent, and just worthless. Despite the fact that in their own journal, the Pediatrics, the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, they published this complete refutation of their previous report, and then they absolutely ignored the fact that their previous report was shown to be garbage, and they just kept promoting it, just as if nothing happened. And so American Academy of Pediatrics deserves blame. And that organization has never done what is their responsibility to do, that is to say that circumcision should not be performed on infants. The Canadian Pediatric Association did that. The Europeans, the Dutch Royal Dutch Medical Association is very strong against circumcision. It's, the American Academy of Pediatrics is an outlier. It has failed in its duty, and to my view, they're criminally liable for the damaging of millions of boys. And I don't know if they'll ever get properly prosecuted for what they've done, but what they've done is criminal in my view.
Also, on a bigger level, I think any kind of religion state, it also applies to what's happening right now with COVID, what they're forcing, especially with infants when they don't have any say. You shouldn't do irreversible damage to people without their consent. Nobody should be going through that just as a precaution, unless you have very big proof that, the side effects are so big, the risk are so massive, but it is not here in this case. And in that case, you just should respect individual rights, autonomy of the body. And because you're talking right now about infants and children rights, right? If anybody want to circumcise themselves and they're a fully mature adult, hopefully informed on different levels, and they still want to do it, I have no problem. I would never do it. I have no problem with it at all.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and we understand this for tattoos. It's illegal to tattoo your children because they have a right to make that decision for themselves. They have a right to an open future. And kids can't make the decision to tattoo themselves until they reach the age of majority in most places. So until they're mature enough to make that decision, they shouldn't be making it. But once they're 18 or 20 or whatever it is in their country, if they want to have tattoos, that's fine. That's their choice. It's a body modification. It's their body. And genital modifications to the genitals should be the same thing. Kids should be protected from it. Kids should not be able to elect it until they have the level of maturity where they can make that decision. But once they do, and if it's informed consent, and that means the person who's selling it has told them all of the downsides, and they understand it, and they're not in an emotional state where they're not able to make a decision. If all those things are true and they're emotionally clear, they understand all the downsides, and they still want to go ahead with it, and they're of age of consent, then that's their right.
Well, I see a big link with what's happening right now in COVID. I also feel that there's no informed consent. If there is, I'm a huge advocate of freedom of speech and freedom of action. People should be able to do what they do. And my 16-year-old son chose to get the experimental jab, let's say. But is he truly informed? Has he seen all perspectives? Have he seen the entire debate? No, we only see one certain debate. And then it's being sold like it was his choice, and he made the choice. Yeah, but based on what information? So I'm always like, show them information, let them think for themselves, and they might reach a conclusion that is opposite to mine. But hey, that's the way of making up your own mind and making a choice. But I see the same link also here with, I can't call this informed consent. I find it like forced consent based on one-sided information. And this is also the purpose of my podcast. You might not agree with what we say, but we show in another perspective, and hopefully it will help you make up your mind by seeing different views about a certain topic.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. You've got to tell the whole story. Unfortunately, with a new vaccine, nobody knows what the long-term consequences are. I mean, hopefully there aren't any.
Well, they do. They must have a time machine, because how the hell can you know long-term side effects? It's not even long-term there. So explain to me, like, how do you already know this, right? Like, I saw this other meme that said, like, they didn't know it was not going to be so ineffective after a while. So that's just after a while, a little bit in the future. That's something you didn't know, but no long-term side effects. That's still something that you know. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the Bloodstained Men, we focus just on one issue, because if we get diverted into other things, we lose our focus. And amongst our supporters, we have people all over the map on how they feel about vaccines. So we just steer clear of it. We steer clear of all. This is
just about the topic that you mentioned, the informed consent. It's important body autonomy and informed consent. And this is not only here, but on different aspects. Yeah.
I totally support your position, because it is really important to understand what you're signing up for.
Also, I make often this comparison. You could have appendicitis, Harry. Am I going to preemptively just take away appendicitis, even though it's only like a certain percentage of cases that they have appendicitis and you have to remove it just to be in case. Are we amputating women their breasts just so they can't have breast cancer?
It's nonsense. Yeah, of course not. Of course not. It's crazy.
That would be crazy. Like, no,
yeah.
We'll see when it's there, and let's just have a checkup, and it's only the minority, or we're advanced in medicine, so we'll see. We don't do this at all. But we don't apply this logic when it comes to circumcision.
Yeah. You're right. It's logic goes out the window as soon as you start talking about the circumcision. It just becomes they are selling something which is not good, and they know it, and they're making profit off of it. And I think there's a mutilation fetish going on amongst people who are getting a thrill out of harming other people. And you can't really prove that, but there's something beyond just money that's driving this, because the intensity of the desire to mutilate boys is just shocking.
And it's also, isn't it? I'm not attacking the Jewish people here, but isn't this also a ritual that when your boy gets circumcised, that it gets like celebrated, or is it a special occasion, or am I mistaken here?
Yeah, so there is. So first of all, some Jews don't circumcise their boys. It's not universal among Jews. Some don't. Some say, well, no, we want what's best for our son, so he's going to keep his whole penis. His whole penis. Thank you. Not going to happen. Just we don't want that. So good for them. And even in Israel, there's a movement to stop circumcision. So and they have a ritual called Brit Shalom, which is
Brits, Brits or something, right?
Yeah. So but there's a variant where it's called Brit Shalom, which is a welcoming without cutting. They have a naming ceremony. They welcome the boy into the community. There's no blood. There's no circumcision, and that's a growing movement in the Jewish world.
Yeah, the one thing. Maybe it's a minority or whatever, but I tell people that in some cases it still goes on, that actually the rabbi or someone they get cuts off and then they suck the blood off the penis.
This does happen.
I'm explaining this, right? People are like, you're crazy. No, I'm not crazy. I'm really talking. So can you imagine the trauma of just the bleeding, the cutting off of stuff of your penis, and then like this pedophilia act being like portrayed? I can't even imagine also, how can you be rabbi, whoever does this, that you would think it's perfectly fine to cut off a baby's penis, and then you're going to suck the blood off sorry for the explicit things that we say here, but we're calling it as it is, that this barbaric practice is still being done. That's even adding the level of pedophilia on it, and it's like, how barbaric can something get to say like, whoa, we're in 2022, like what's going on here?
Right. So there's a really traditional sect. I think they're called the Hasidics, and they are, and they do this. They suck the blood off of the penis with the mouth, oral suction, and it causes sometimes infection.
Wow.
Because sometimes there have been cases in New York that have been documented where boys die from getting herpes from the mouth of the rabbi that sucked the bloody wound.
Wow.
So the baby dies, dies, dead. There are others where they get an infection and they end up with brain damage from the infection. So the baby is now a vegetable for life, just so that the rabbi can suck the bloody penis. There was a brouhaha about that in New York. It came to the attention of the New York City Health Department, and their response was that the parents have to sign a note that says they understand that this is going to happen to their boy. The boy got no protection whatsoever. He has no rights. He's an American citizen. He has no rights. He has no right to be protected. And that's the best the New York City Health Department could do. It's so they basically are signing a note that says, my boy could be excused from life. I'm okay with that. And that's where we are. That's because nobody wants to oppose religion in America. Nobody wants to say, no, you're going too far. That shouldn't happen.
It's crazy because sometimes, in Belgium, they attacked I don't know, maybe it was a Muslim celebration where they slaughter a goat, and then, you know, it's being done in the traditional way. And then some animal organizations would say like, no, you can't do it that way. It's between brackets inhuman or too painful. But it's like, you're advocating for animal rights here because it's too painful and too much blood and too barbaric. But silence about this that's still going on. Like, I don't understand the lobby probably, but I don't understand that this practice can still continue in this century.
It is shocking. The foreskin is also used. It's sold when the baby's cut. The foreskin is sold, and it's used for genetic engineering or tissue engineering, and they culture tissue products from it. And they make face cream for wealthy women from it, from boys' foreskins, from living boys' foreskins. Yeah. And it's been promoted by Oprah and other celebrities. It's just shocking. You just can't believe these things are really happening, but they really did. And it's a face cream that's made in part from stolen foreskins stolen from baby boys. And this is happening in America, the land of the free, the champion of human rights. This is happening in the United States of America, where we're supposed to be the model of human rights, and this is how.
Let's make it visual. What happens here actually that they do? They put the penis underneath something.
I have
and
a photograph, if I can share it with you.
Yeah.
It's. I'm not. Let's see. Let's see if I can share on. So share screen.
Yeah.
Let me try that. Let's see. Share.
Yeah, the people on the podcast will just need to check it on YouTube or on Rumble.
Oh.
And you can see if you find it.
Yeah, I mean, does Zoom have a share?
Yeah, normally click share
photo?
Screen and then you can show it. But also, if you don't find it immediately, maybe you can describe it a bit. I was wondering, did you just put it under a plank and then they just take a knife? Like sometimes you have some paper and then you just cut it off.
It's a brutal process because the foreskin is attached to the foreskin is fused to the glands of the penis at the time of birth. And so it's like pulling, in order to start the process, they have to separate the foreskin from the glands. It's like ripping somebody's fingernails off. That's the sort of thing it is. It's extremely painful. They jam a probe in there to separate. Up until the 70s in the United States, no anesthetic was used, none. So this was extremely painful. They went through, and they told the parents, well, babies can't feel pain. This was their dogma. Well, it's okay. Babies can't feel pain, and if they do, they won't remember it. It's just lunacy. Anyway, this went on for decades, and nobody in the medical profession lifted a finger to stop it. It is obviously the most absurd, unscientific, cruel, vicious thing to be doing, and they didn't do a damn thing to stop it. This is American medical profession, sadly. They didn't do anything. It was only stopped when parents complained and said, you've got to do something about this. My boy is suffering. And it was only because of the intervention of parents. Not the medical profession never would have done it on their own. That's really tragic. But I can't even wrap my head around what's gone wrong with the American medical profession. It's just lost the thread. Anyway,
maybe I can share something on my YouTube, and then just I can upload it that people can check it out, and I can put it like over the video that people can look at it. How old are children on average when they do it?
Well, in America, 99% of circumcisions are done in the first year of life. So, and most of those are in the first days of life. So they are at their most vulnerable stage. They've just gone through the trauma of birth. They are in desperate need of warmth. They're no longer in the womb. They need the warmth and cuddling and the love of their mother. They need her breast. They need her touch. They need gentleness. They need to be welcomed into the world. And they brutalize them with a knife. I mean, that's what happens.
And how long do they take to recover on average from it? Like recover, I mean, just physically then, I mean, right?
Yeah, so there's one thing, you never recover from an amputation because you can't regrow a body part, but you can, the wound will heal. The wound heals in a couple of weeks, but they never recover. The trauma is never undone. The damage is never undone. But the wound will heal after a couple of weeks. But in that time, the open wound is in a diaper with shit and urine. It's just like, oh, this is to be cleaner. They say this is cleaner.
And do you know any research about doctors who truly just, I mean, it's kind of hard to investigate this when you're anti it and then just measure the effects of it. But do you know any doctors research that tested maybe their reactions, you know, how anxious they were, how much they cried, maybe test their pain levels? Do you know any research that's being done on how this process is for babies?
Yes, there was research so blood cortisol levels. Cortisol is a hormone that is released when you're in stress and pain, and the blood cortisol levels of infants undergoing circumcision are just off the charts. So it's proof that they're having an experience, as if their crying wasn't enough, but that's proof that they're going through trauma. So it's known that there's no doubt, and anybody who could seriously believe, who's ever been around a baby, could think that babies don't feel pain. I mean, babies are just exquisitely sensitive to pain. They're more
this is the thing.
than humans, than they're adults.
Babies, until I don't know what the age is, maybe 2 or 3, they mostly sense their environment through their body and through their emotions. They can't just rationally rationalize like, yeah, but this was necessary because in religion and this. Babies don't think this way. They think in an innate, emotional, embodied sense. So probably that experience will be even more traumatic because sensing is how they sense the world, how the world makes sense to them. And you reduce something that makes them sense, makes them feel.
Yeah. It's the baby has no religion. He doesn't know what religion is. All he knows is he's being attacked. The baby doesn't know about some sort of remote possibility of a health benefit. All he knows is he's being attacked. He doesn't know anything else.
And also the strange thing is often that one of the worst things to realize for a baby and a child is for them to realize that they're in the hands of somebody who doesn't care about them. So what do they often do? They rationalize that something is wrong with them, because they also want to believe that they're in the hands of caretakers who care about them. So often that's also the trauma about self-esteem, self-worth. Oh, I'm being punished. Something is taken away. There must be something wrong with me, which is one of the most biggest issues for a lot of trauma, shame, anger, and other issues. The feeling that people have that there's something innately wrong with them, which hurts them and limits them from achieving self-love. And this is a kind of physical act of this whole process that initiates it.
Yeah, you're right. It's I mean, it's, why would you do that to somebody? It's just, and as you point out, they want to believe that they're loved. And one of the hardest things about for cut men is to realize that they were betrayed by their own people. It's such a devastating thing to think, well, these are my people and they turned against me. They hurt me. They injured me. These are the people that are supposed to be my people.
How do you heal from that process? How do you heal from this? Like when you would realize like, whoa, I got a lot of trauma, a lot of issues, a lot of grief around this. How do you heal the relationship with the people who caused this, or the community who caused this?
It's really hard because one thing that you have, I always tell people to do when you're dealing with parents who allowed their boy to be cut, is you have to first acknowledge that they were misled. Mm-hmm. If they had been told the truth, they would not have done this. So the blame really is on the medical profession for lying to parents. Parents want what's best for their kids. There are sadistic, sick people out there who are parents, but they're really rare. Most parents are just want the best for their kid. So I think, first of all, if you're going to confront parents, the first thing in your mind is think, well, they are suffering too. They were lied to. This is a tremendous humiliation for them that they were duped. And so, you go gentle. And yeah, that's the main thing. But people don't want to admit it. It's really hard to admit it. And the other thing is that amongst cut men, some of them just can't deal with the pain. There's documented cases of men who commit suicide when they really confront what happened to them, and they just don't want to go on. It's just like, yeah, I don't want to live in this world now. So
I have my own stance about everything, and people who've been following my podcast know what my stance is towards Corona, but I see a lot of resemblances with this, with now that they're going for the kids, and that these kids have no say at all about this. And when it would seem that they would have negative consequences, how will they have the same discussion that they have about circumcision, about them? I can't reverse this anymore. And you would have the same thing, like trying to have empathy towards your parents or the community for what they did, but you suffered, you can't reverse time anymore. So that's a very difficult process. I mean, I see the resemblance between the two and draw the comparison. You might not agree, but that's a very hard process, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, let's hope there aren't really bad downsides to the vaccines that are out there, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the long-term thing is going to be. No, I don't think nobody knows. It hasn't been around that long. So I just hope, we know with circumcision, we know that it's harmful. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that it's traumatic and causes permanent injury and loss of sexual function. We know that. There's no doubt about that.
But still there you see how big the power of narrative is, right? Because he who controls the narrative controls the behavior. And even if the behavior doesn't make sense, just keep on fueling the narrative, sponsoring the narrative, and people will just keep on continuing it. 70, 80%, it's less than before, but still 70, 80% of the people. How was this process for you? Like, why did you become interested in this topic? I mean, you're a bit older than me. I don't know if you're always passionate about this. What was your whole journey like?
So I grew up in a Catholic family in Southern California, and we had, on the first of the year, the Catholic Church has a holy day, which is called the Feast of the Circumcision. And the odd thing about this holy day is nobody ever talked about what was being celebrated. It was just like the weirdest thing. We have this celebration, the Feast of the Circumcision, but nobody ever talks about it. It was just too embarrassing. And so finally, I was 16. I asked my mom, well, what is the Feast of the Circumcision about anyway? Because I didn't know. And I had seen an uncut boy in school, but I didn't, all the other boys were cut and I was cut. And so I thought there was something wrong with him, because I just thought, well, gee, he's got a funny penis. But anyway, I didn't know that I was cut. I just didn't know. I thought that I was normal. I thought I was born this way. And I could see her face just became so full of pain that I just couldn't ask any more about it from her. She was just, I touched a raw nerve, and I knew that I couldn't pursue it, because it was just like, clearly.
Well, they touched the raw nerve. Sorry, as a term,
yeah.
Very
but
raw,
I mean, as I said, in the 50s, they didn't even ask sometimes. I don't know if they asked my parents or what, but in any case, once I realized that there's something going on here that I just don't understand, I've read about it. I got this book about, sex information for teenagers. And it said that the end of the penis is cut off in circumcision. And I thought, oh, that means they cut off the head of the penis? And I thought, well, I'm so glad they didn't do that to me.
Yeah.
And then I realized, well, wait a minute, there's this scar that circles my penis. And they did cut something off of me. And then it was like, oh my God, how could they have? What the fuck? It's like, what the fuck? It's my body. What the fuck? Everything they taught me about what's right, about ethics, about being good to animals and not, everything that they taught me about what it was to be a good human being was violated. And it's just like, how did that fucking happen? And I just, from that point on, I saw my parents differently. And I saw my society differently. It was just like, well, these people aren't really competent. And I'm on my own here. I can't really rely on these people. And it's, it was like, well, I had to grow up. And so I knew I just knew, wow, this should not have happened. This is my body, the most private part of my body. They had no business doing anything to it. And, there was just certainty from that moment. And it's never changed. And, there's everything I've learned since has only corroborated what was obvious to me in the beginning, that this is an outrage.
So your mom innately felt a bit guilty for it, because that's like a huge step, because most parents would just condone it or rationalize it away.
Yeah, she was someone who was really good about explaining things. And every time I asked her a question, she would just just take the time to explain everything to me and make sure I understood it. She was really good at that. Anything that she could explain, she would do it immediately. And this, she wouldn't talk about. So I knew there's something going on. And the expression on her face, clearly she was she was suffering. This was great guilt that I'd hit. And so, yeah, I know, her empathy was there. It was too late to change what happened.
How did your parents, I don't know if they still live or not, how did they look back at it now, and you also advocating for this? What was their stance, or did their stance change when you became more involved in it?
We never really talked about it. And they've both passed for some time. But it was just an area that I couldn't go there with them. There was no point. I couldn't go there with them. I wish I could have.
Yeah. Did you have any, if you're willing to share, negative experiences also? Or if you don't, do you have any specific examples of stories that you heard or that you hear regularly of people who got circumcised? What trauma, emotional, physical, social?
Well, I've had to go through life with a partial penis. I mean, how humiliating is that? This is the mark. The ancient history was that the Egyptians marked their slaves at the time with the Jews with circumcision. That's how the Jews picked it up. It was the mark of a slave. That's what I have to go through life with. I can't undo it. I don't get another life. This is the only one I got. And that's what I've had to deal with. I mean, I'm an amputee. It's just what a fucking disgusting thing to have to say. And I'm a victim of a corrupt system that profits off of mutilating children. That's who I am. That's what I, as a free American, Americans, the land of freedom. This is what happened to me. I mean, the idea that we're a free people and we don't have the right to our own bodies is absurd. It's the pretense of freedom. It's a sham. So I'm pretty cynical about it.
How does your environment react to it when you know that you're in a majority and you're standing for something? People will say like, amputee, he's over exaggerating, or it's not so bad, or etc. Like how is this journey of trying to box against the cloud sometimes? Do you feel there's a change the last years, decades?
Some people are receptive. Some people you can reach. Most people don't want to know. They don't want to be bothered. And I've had this experience recently. I went to visit some friends and relatives back in Southern California, and two women independently said the same thing to me. So, what's the big deal about circumcision? Mm. It's like, God, I've been on the streets. I've been writing about this. I've been doing videos. And that's all you've got after all this time? You've got nothing? So what's the big deal about circumcision? Didn't you even bother to read anything or pay any attention at all? And you're my relative. You're my best friend's wife. And this is what you've got? I'm just shocked. I was just shocked. So it's like, no, it doesn't affect them. They don't give a shit. That's where, I mean, that's the way people are, unfortunately.
You also mentioned something shocking when we talked before the call. Can you tell me something more about the American-style mass male circumcision in vulnerable populations in Africa and the funding of it?
This is a shock. And most people, when they hear about it, they don't believe it because it seems incredible. But the scam of circumcision, so you have to go way back, but there have been hundreds of reasons given for circumcising boys, hundreds of medical excuses, that it prevents disease, that it prevents masturbation, that it prevents headaches, that it prevents bedwetting, anything you could think of, prevents cancer, whatever it is, whatever people are worried about, this will cure it. So they've always, I mean, the medical profession here and other advocates for mutilating boys have found always an endless supply of excuses for mutilating boys. So during the 70s and the height of the AIDS hysteria, of course, they're going to say it prevents AIDS. And some shoddy research was done, unethical research was done in Africa, where it would be illegal to do anywhere else because that involved in exposing healthy people to the HIV virus. So unethical research on human beings, something that Dr. Mengele would have been proud of, was done in order to prop up this idea that it prevents HIV. So what they did 3 studies, they did 4 studies, 3 where they exposed HIV negative female partners to HIV negative male partners to HIV positive female partners. This is unethical research on human subjects. They exposed HIV negative male to HIV positive women.
Insane, yeah.
And so they cut some of the men and left some of the men uncut during the time and then they said, go ahead, have sex, and we'll see who gets AIDS. But the cut men had to stop and wait to heal before they could have sex. So already more of the uncut men had a head start in this race to get HIV. So they were getting exposed more. And then they gave the cut men condoms. So it was a completely unscientific and corrupt study. So they found a tiny percentage, like between 1% and 3%, more HIV amongst the uncut men. Unsurprisingly, they had rigged the study so that that's what they would find. So then that became the claim that circumcision prevents HIV. There was a 4th study, which was in the other direction. HIV positive men to HIV negative female partners. And so they cut some of the men and left some of the men uncut and said, okay, now we'll see how many female partners get HIV. And lo and behold, more women got HIV from the cut men than from the uncut men. So it increased the transmission of HIV to be cut. So what did they do? They stopped the study early because of futility. Now just think about that. What's futile about finding that circumcision causes a higher transmission of HIV? If you're concerned about HIV, that's a very important result. But if you're concerned only about promoting genital mutilation of men, well, then it's futile. And that's what they said. It was futile. They weren't going to get what they wanted from this study. So they stopped it. So this is the level of hypocrisy and corruption that was in this effort to justify and legitimize male genital mutilation. So once they had this, then they said, well, this was fed into the American Academy of Pediatrics report that said, oh, we're doing it because it prevents HIV. It prevents HIV. And then in addition, they used this statistical trick where they had a real, they didn't look at, they ignored the fact that it increases transmission to women, only looked at the fact that it apparently decreased to men. and then did a statistical trick where instead of reporting the actual 1%, they said 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it was. They said, and it reduces HIV by 60%, 60%, because that was the relative difference, which is completely misleading. But then this became the mantra. And if you talk to anyone in Africa, what does circumcision do to HIV? It reduces it by 60%, 60%, 60%, 60%. And you have to realize that the bigger problem of HIV transmission is from men to women. So if you increase that direction from men to women, if you make the bigger problem worse and the smaller problem ostensibly better, you're making the overall problem worse. So there's nothing about it that makes any sense. There's nothing about it that's legitimate or scientific or valid. It's a sham. And anyway, this sham has led to the misallocation of resources to the tune of billions to mutilate African men. And they have mutilated 25 million African men and boys. And it started out with the name voluntary male medical circumcision, voluntary. And then they started doing it to boys. And then they started doing it to infants. Where is the voluntary? And it's a crime against humanity, literally a crime against humanity. It's funded by the United States. It's funded by the CDC, PEPFAR, which was supposed to be the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. It was, everything about circumcision, they hijacked good intents and turned them into foul intent. The good intent of PEPFAR was to help people in Africa where their AIDS problem was terrible. It was hijacked and turned into a male genital mutilation campaign. And turned from helping people to harming them. When you explain it to people, they don't believe that this could really happen. UNAIDS, United Nations, is involved. It's just this corruption that just metastasizes and spreads and spreads and spreads. There is no way when people finally look back at what happened and don't see that this was a horrendous crime. A horrendous crime.
Oh, but
anyway,
I see a lot of resemblances also with Bill Gates, what he sometimes did in India and Africa. When you look at some kind of project he set up, then there were also some experiments and misallocation of money and just using, you just do it in Africa, just do it in India, like they won't care so much. It's just horrendous how people, because you can look at videos, which books Bill Gates recommended, and one of them was How to Lie with Statistics. Well, just use the numbers how you want to. Make the data fit whatever conclusion you want it to have. That seems to be the main thing with journalism, with politics, also with whatever kind of money, power, influence-based institution. Like just make it fit the narrative and twist it around, and then it will be okay. It's a total scam of what not. Normally science and politics and journalism and true change should be about.
Yeah, I'm so disappointed in Bill Gates. He had the chance to do so much good for humanity, and he has blown it. And he's ruined. His reputation. Well, the Gates Foundation funds public media in America, so that they kind of have everybody in their.
Yeah, and also read someone who's a marketeer of me, and they said like 70 to 80% of the marketing on television and mainstream media, it's the pharma industry, like 70, 80%
they have
of
them
the
in
ads.
their pocket.
That's 80%, the people who sponsor it. So 1 + 1 often is 2, so you don't need to think so much about what the interests would be behind the scenes,
Yeah, so Gates admitted to having met with Jeffrey Epstein, and we know that Jeffrey Epstein had this island where he brought powerful men, and some of them had sex with minors. We know that list eventually will be revealed.
This is also crazy, right? In this thing, there was Ghislaine Maxwell who smuggled these kids to the island of her, and then she got like a trial, but it was like a side story of a side story, right? Like so when Trump was the president, everything he does was mainstream news, and here we basically have like child trafficking or minor trafficking, like one of the most despicable things that could happen, like organized pedophilia, and then it's a side story that she get convicted, And then there's no focus about the fly list of that plane, which was called the Lolita I'm not kidding you. This plane was called the Lolita Express.
Right.
That's
so
how
they didn't
open
do that
it
for
was.
no reason.
And they don't look at the list and who's flying and integrity and do it like seriously, you know. Some things they go super deep, it's all over the news. But this little thing, they only cover the surface. Like, what?
Right. So I mean, so when people are behaving as if someone has a gun to their head, if they're behaving as if they're being blackmailed, you know, maybe they are being blackmailed. Maybe they were being blackmailed. Maybe that's what the root of all this was. And I don't know. But I mean, they behave as if they're being coerced, because this promoting genital mutilation has nothing to do with the ideals of these organizations that they say they have. So why are they behaving that way?
Exactly. Like, this is such a shame, but maybe I have too much integrity, you know, or higher up power, influence, and money. It accumulates to certain people with a certain kind of mindset. If this truly was about with COVID, about health, if this truly was about health with circumcision, if this truly was about helping people become healthier, stronger, more fulfilled, more informed, we could use Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, all the people, their money, the resources to spend in prevention, in education, in treatment, and then as a last resort, pharma, etc. But they are saying that that's the reason. But when I look at actually the consequences, the research, how the resources are being spent, that's totally not aligned with what the original mission should be or the best way to spend resources. So you just spin the narrative that it just fits the thing under the guise of something beneficial. But then when you look at the actual practice, it doesn't make any sense how they spend money or how they're treating people or how they use the resources. Because we have the resources, we have the knowledge, we could use the good in people to really want the best for as much people as possible. And then these people can spend so much into the perception manipulating industries that they seem like the ultimate philanthropist, ultimate, you know, like messiahs. But then when you look at their actual behavior, I'll look at Bill Gates complaining about, oh yeah, it's a really bad year. A bad year, Bill? Your money just went up with $1 gazillion. Like you just made more profit. You just invested in all the things right now that are super influential and make you a lot of money. Yeah, it's easy to complain on your throne while the money is being stacked in the back. How can I take these people serious? Elon Musk complaining about AI while he's producing AI. He's producing it. He's warning of the dangers while he actually in the industry and he's making money out of it. Jeff Bezos talking about pollution while he's just investing in it to make more money and then shooting rockets in the sky. I mean, these people, they sell one story and then you look at their behavior and the research, like, are you kidding me? I looked up at, I mean, I'm all for like capitalism up until a certain level, but I looked at how much money Jeff Bezos is making. I didn't even know it would be like $2,500 per second or something, or probably even more. These numbers just make your mind boggle. And then I would say, let's spend it in healthy, strong, fulfilled people, make the planet strong, use resources in a good way. But then you see again how it's being used. We could do so much better, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, rant over, but that's a bit where I'm at when I look at what we could do and what we actually do, and what the people who so-called have our best interest in mind, what they say they will do, and then I look at their actual behavior and agenda, and there's a huge mismatch between the two, you know.
Yep. And the best intentions get hijacked, and it's shocking that this is what happens. I mean, I just at a loss. I just feel like it's so frustrating because you think somebody like Bill Gates or any of them could do so much good.
Yeah,
and they say they want to, but why are they doing the opposite?
If you look at it from a Christian or whatever perspective, lack of love, I think lack of love, lack of connection, trauma or something that you do this. I can imagine like doing this, or I can imagine having this wealth or even wanting so much health and then spending it this way or using populations this way. I can imagine that.
Yeah, I can imagine that they're being coerced in some way because it doesn't, their values and their actions don't correlate. They just don't. They don't make sense. At any rate, the HIV studies were then fed back into the United States to support the CDC's claim that circumcision is the risks outweigh the benefit, was their claim. It was disproved. It didn't matter. They just kept going on it. And then the US CDC then picked up this claim and then passed a law, a regulation that says that doctors have to promote circumcision in the United States, have to promote circumcision to parents and to teenage boys. And people don't believe that, and I don't blame them. But if you look up CDC-2012-112, I believe it is, let me just check. You can find it for yourself. It's a reality.
Also, something that I agree with you on, like, there was like a crusade against female mutilation, that they try to limit women, their sexuality by mutilating them, especially like in Africa. So we have a two-sided discourse. Everybody's outraged about what happens with women, and we can't mutilate women here, and it's barbaric, the practices. But then on the other hand, when you look also at reducing sensitivity, sexual pleasure in men, it's a completely different dynamic, it seems, than when we talk about literal female genital mutilation.
Yeah, it's total hypocrisy. I mean, what really disappointed me about feminism is that, it was about equal rights, and I support that 100%. And then when it came time to produce a law, a federal law in the United States against genital mutilation, it was only for girls. Boys were explicitly excluded. So there goes your equal rights. They claim equal rights was their goal, but when it comes down to actually writing legislation, it's equal rights for us, but not for you. You get excluded. You don't count because you're male. And it's like, what fucking hypocrites. I was so disappointed because I supported feminism. I thought they were doing a good thing. And I still think equal rights is a good thing. I think everybody should have opportunities and not be excluded based on any aspect of their personality or race or gender or what. People should be free to pursue their potential, whatever it is. I still believe that. But when it comes down to actually writing legislation, we don't care about equal rights. It's for us, not for you. And it's blatantly unconstitutional. And the Constitution of the United States says there can be no discrimination based on sex. So, well, it's this cultural Marxism that I gave lectures about, and they cherry pick certain issues and certain categories. Like, it almost becomes an identity politics thing. Like, okay, you're a woman, you're a victim, but she's black, she's a victim. So black woman, I don't know, is the black part more oppressor, or so when they complained in the West about women's rights, and I'm all about principles and equal opportunities, just as you. But then when we were pointing towards some practices in Muslim countries, oh no, then we're racist. But you're for women's rights, and there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah, no, you can't touch that, because as soon as I touch that, then I'm a racist. No, I'm against racism. I'm for men's rights, female rights. I'm for rights. I'm for seeing the potential in people and having them self-determine themselves. And then again, you hit these identity politics, or these certain things that can be touched, and these other things that cannot be touched. They're hypocrites. It's really, the struggle for human rights is really hard. And it gores a lot of sacred cows, and there's no way around it. You can't say you're for the rights of for girls to be educated in Muslim countries and say, oh well, we can't say that because they're Muslim. Well, no. If girls have a right to be educated, they have a right to be educated no matter where they live. And if you're against genital mutilation, it should be for boys, girls, and their intersex people that are born, which is another whole topic, but born with ambiguous genitalia. They're not the same. It's not the same as transgender. It's people that are born hermaphrodites. Right? Yeah. It's actually a bit of both. And the problem there is that they've been forcibly assigned to one sex or another when they're young by the parents. Say, oh well, this is an embarrassment. Make that my child a girl, or make my child a boy. Well, then the child grows up and says, well, you made me a girl, but I'm really a boy. Why did you do that to me? So they have a right to be protected until they decide what they want for themselves. If anything, there are some intersex people who say, well, I know I'm different, but I'm happy just the way I am. And I don't want any surgery. I don't want anything changed. I like me. And that's that's the same thing. You don't interfere with somebody. You let them decide what they want for themselves. You don't abrogate their right to self-control and consent.
If people want to know more about Bloodstained Men and everything that you're doing, where can they find out more about you, your mission, or maybe some useful sites, resources that people could check out?
Yeah, bloodstainedmen.com, one word, bloodstainedmen.com is our website. And there's lots of resources there. There's videos, there's scientific papers, there's, depending on what you're interested in, there's lots going on. We're doing a tour of this. One of our main activities is doing on-street protests, and we're going to be doing a tour starting late in February, and we're going to start in Las Vegas and spend 20 days going through the Southwest. And people who are interested are very welcome to join our tours, our protests. They're friendly. Lots of moms and kids show up. We're not. Some protests are very scary. Ours are not scary. We're very friendly people, nice people. We are about kindness and compassion and gentleness. And our protests are lots of fun. And so for those who are interested in learning more, one great way to learn, if we come to your city, just talk to us at the protest sites. We're there. We'll talk to anybody as long as they want to talk. And, they're actually fun.
One last question. I mean, I am pretty much on side of your mission, but let's also talk realistically. What do you think realistically should become the law if people still want to become circumcised? Do you have any idea? I mean, you wish that nobody would do it, but what would be the age you think you're looking for? 16, 18, or a certain age? And what should be provided to people, or what should be changed that you feel that is something that's doable in my lifetime to make this happen?
Well, in the United States, we have this female genital mutilation law, which is perfect in every way. Girls are protected no matter what the parents believe. The girl has a right to her own body. There's no exception for parental whims or desires. That the girl still has a right to her own body. There's no any level of cutting is not allowed. It's very clear. The only time an intervention can happen is if there's a real immediate medical need, not some future possible benefit, a real immediate medical need. So that law is perfect in every way, except that it's not gender neutral. It needs to apply to both sexes. So that is the bare minimum that would satisfy me, and as terms of laws. It's already there. It just needs to be made gender neutral. In terms of how old someone should be, that we used to think the brain was fully developed at 18. They now believe it's fully developed at 25. So if you ask me, I'd say, well, wait till they're 25, because then they have judgment. Their judgment is fully in place. They can make a decision that's based on the wisdom of at least aging to 25. It should not ever be done based on coercion or misinformation or somebody else's desires. And again, if that's what I think should happen. Realistically, I just hope humanity survives long enough for some progress to be made at all, because you just think of so much is going wrong all the time. I don't know. It's like there's climate change and there's nuclear weapons and the possibilities of terrible wars. And I mean, it's just like, well, I just hope humanity can get through this terrible time and start looking after the most vulnerable and the ones who can't speak for themselves, and just let kindness rule. I mean, that is not asking a lot. It's just kindness. Just be kind to children.
Amen, man. And what I often say is the real heroes are the great parents. And if you give people the gift of a childhood, a relatively trauma-filled childhood, and then some education where you acknowledge them for what they are, their talents. Oh man, you have such a lighter backpack, backpack full of tools, knowing to move forward in life, instead of a backpack of stones that are weighing you down with all negativity, man. I'm fully support with that mission, because in a way, the children are our future. And if we can make them more empowered of basic human rights from the beginning, they have a lot more positive baggage to work with than negative baggage to work with.
Yeah.
Wish you all the best on your mission, Harry, and thanks for being a guest on this interesting but controversial topic.
Thanks for letting me be here, Philip. Thank you so much.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and support our mission of freedom of speech. With increasing restrictions on fundamental freedoms, we believe that now, more than ever, is the time for you to be an online coach or consultant and become independent from the system. That's why we created the Client Closer Academy. Learn how to consistently enroll clients and join a community of fellow free thinkers who value personal responsibility, speaking their truth, and making an impact. Find out more at clientcloser.com/academy. Rant over.